All right. So today we have CS Office Hours. Welcome. This is a special Halloween session earlier in the day. We have Ezra Zimbler, who's over from Dublin, Ireland this morning, your afternoon. And I'll let Ezra introduce himself, but because he's part of a specialized team, we thought it would be fun to dig in on specialization in and specialized CS teams. All right, so before we dig into that, Ezra, do you want to just say hi and introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Ezra here. Yes, I'm actually live from London today. I'm over here for a couple days.
Oh, right, London.
Just got a nice did a little tour of the countryside. Went to Stonehenge yesterday.
Oh.
So excited here. You can probably tell from my accent, not originally from Dublin or London. I grew up in upstate New York. Started my customer success journey just around 9 years ago in New York. Working for LinkedIn out of the New York office, working with some of our recruiting and hiring platforms. About almost 5 years ago now, I moved over to Dublin and started working in some of these more specialized teams within our customer success function. So really excited to be talking about that topic today. And yeah, so the team I currently lead specializes in our talent intelligence platform called Talent Insights, where folks can search the talent marketplace and kind of see data on everything that exists in live. It updates every day, so kind of a live look at the talent marketplace. And my team specializes in helping our customers to use this data, figure out where in their organization it will be helpful, working mostly in HR and L&D world.
Right, because LinkedIn, very much about helping people get hired, right?
Yes,
So.
our biggest business line all around hiring.
Nice. Okay, great. So let me share the slides here and we'll dig in. So in terms of building specialized teams, part of how you might think about specializing your team is thinking about the maturity of your program, the maturity of your company, right? So that if sometimes if you're a very early stage startup, you just hire CSMs who are going to kind of do everything, or you might not even call them CSMs, you might just call them support, right? And at that point, in very early stages, sometimes all you really care is about onboarding and supporting your customer. And so people are wearing lots of different hats. And when they're wearing a lot of different hats, sometimes they don't clarify to the customers that, oh, I'm doing support with you right now, but I'm doing onboarding with you right now. And now I'm helping you adopt the product. So I'm really being your CSM right now. And it is important to clarify, even at those early stages, what those hats are. So we'll dig into that a little bit. But Ezra, what do you want to say about this stage?
Yeah, I think like to your point, in those early stages, it's all around like, what are CSMs there to do? Is it everything? Which I think you're talking about very early stage. It's like you're anything post sales, you're coming in. But then I think to your point, as you mature, it's really figuring out where can we do some of the specialization and how do we ensure customers understand what their customer success manager is doing and what they aren't doing. And I think like two of the places we see some of this specialization starting is around some of these places in the life cycle. So you see onboarding and renewals here. So it's like, okay, we're really seeing that onboarding is a huge issue. And like we want to put additional resources there. Similar on the renewal side, like, people are starting really strong, but then, tapering off, not getting to that strong renewal period. So I think, yeah, early days in specialization, that's really where we can see it. It is more along the life cycle and then really defining where that CSM is and where that CSM isn't.
And one of the things that I usually advise for folks is that at these early stages, when you're wearing so many different hats, to literally have a separate support email, so that when your customers need something for support, that you have a way of tracking it, right? So that you have a way of tracking to know if it's beginning, middle, and end, if it's been resolved, how many tickets on which types of of themes you have, which types of issues you might have. So even at that early stage, to try and put in a ticketing process of some sort, if you can. Sometimes people do that in Slack. There are ways even that you can do that in Slack these days. But wherever you do it, whether it's email, whether you have a formal ticketing tool, or if you're doing it over in Slack, some way that you can tag it and track if it's been completed, right? Also, then what happens is when you do expand your team so that you have specialization between support, onboarding, etc., then you can make it clear that, or then it's an easier transition, right? Then they don't continue to come to the strategic advisor for a ticket issue. And you don't have to wean them off of that because they already know and they're practiced at putting support tickets in a place that can be tracked. And that also helps the CSM sort of switch, right? Because it's hard sometimes when we're switching back and forth from all these different types of activities. It's important to know when you're doing one type of activity versus another, so that then you're also instilling in them, this is how you do strategic behaviors, right? And so it's just important to think about that if you're a CS leader. And if you're a CSM, it's important to think about those different hats that you're wearing too, and why it's so important to be able to track those tickets and that sort of thing. For onboarding, then sometimes onboarding sometimes is like, I've talked to some founders who are like, oh my God, if onboarding takes more than 20 minutes, we're doing something wrong, right? And in that case, then you might just turn that into a PLG motion where it's all self-serve, or you might have a CSM involved in it, but it's not really warranted to separate out. So part of what you're evaluating when you're thinking about how you separate out and maturity is how much time is it taking, and is it a distraction? Or as a CSM, are you able to still do those strategic activities with the customer? Or is it really taking a lot of time to do the onboarding? Again, another area of specialization might be renewals. And for renewals, then what you're thinking about with that is this will often happen if there's, say, procurement involved, or a lot of legal involvement, contractual, or if you get to be a very large organization, when you have like $100 million in post-sale revenue, by then, usually, it should have been probably earlier, but certainly by then you would have a separate renewals team. And the renewals teams, we've seen that sometimes reporting up to sales. My preference is for the renewals team to report to the post-sales leader, the CS leader, just because then it's more connected to what the customers are trying to achieve post-sales, as opposed to sometimes if it's related to sales, it's so much about earning that revenue for the salesperson or for the company, that they forget if the renewals or expansions actually will serve the customer. And it's very important in the post-sales motion for the revenue that's connected there, for it to be in service to the customer, or else you're very close to losing it the next time around that it comes up. So that's sort of the key things I would think to mention there. Anything else you want to add in there in terms of the life cycle, Ezra?
Yeah, and I love the call on the ticketing system, but I love how that's blown up in the chat as well. I think this one is really important as well, as you think about these kind of next stages of specialization, to be able to have that support and ticketing data, to be able to tell you this is where we have a problem. And I think like figuring out those signs for you of like, this is where we need to specialize, this is why. And I think ticketing and support data can be one really good input into that, of like, hey, we're seeing, and even this, like, we're seeing a lot of tickets come on during onboarding because people are confused and maybe we need those specialists. So I do think, that's a really good call out of like more ways you can get that data throughout the life cycle. And I think the support is a really good one to talk about. It's like those can be great inputs as you go down through this kind of, thinking about different ways of specialization.
Right. And that's another thing too. If onboarding, ideally would take 2 weeks, and instead it's taking months, well, then that's a really good sign that you should specialize onboarding and have some focused people who are ensuring that there's a beginning, middle, and end that's successful and it's getting done. But looking at the data in the life cycle to identify and also looking at the data in terms of where your team is spending their time, those two things can really help you identify when you might want to specialize. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to the next few things on that front? Okay, if you do, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. Technical and product specialization. Ezra, did you want to dig into that?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so this is where my team comes in, and I think this is where, you know, it's a bit of an art and science, I would say, on specialization as you're thinking about the different products or the technical, you know, integrations or different places that you need within your organization. I do think, like, you know, for my own team, like, this is where it was, okay, we realized this is a product that's a bit different from our other ones. This is one where, you know, additional support for both our internal and internal teams and customers are going to need some of that support. So I think some of it will be based on like your knowledge of your company and your client base and new products or services that you are implementing. I think the technical one's a really interesting one as well, where we see a lot, like, if you're going to need technical integrations to make your platforms or your products sustainable, like, that is a place where you're going to need folks to be able to speak that language, and really be able to go deep. Because, like, again, I would say, you know, for LinkedIn, our average CSM, you know, we don't hire for technical expertise. So when there are those moments where, you know, customers, you know, CIO, CTO is coming to you and saying, hey, how do I create this integration? How do I make sure this technically works in the right way? And having someone who can, you know, speak in their terms and in their, and, you know, knowing what's going to need to happen, we've seen to be extremely powerful. And, like, when those integrations happen, like, there is so much stickiness that comes to your platform with those integrations. So again, some of them have that technical nature. So I think those are two, the technical and the product side, where, again, the knowledge of your customers and of the products and services that you offer are going to be really important. Like, so for us on the technical side, like, our learning platform has a lot of integrations with different like learning systems and what's the, like, CR no, it's not an ATS, like Workday type things, where it's like trying to get employee data and match that with learning courses that they're taking. So all of that stuff where it makes your products easier to use, again, is going to help them be stickier, and, like, having the people who can implement those in the right way, I do think is really powerful.
And another thing that'll happen too is whether you might, so there's a difference if you, who you need as your CSM team, like if they all need to be technical versus if you need to have specialized people in your team that have a technical focus, and then other CSMs who do not have a technical focus, right? Who are just more business oriented, because you might separate it out that way. Another thing that we haven't mentioned yet is professional services, right? Sometimes what will happen is if you have a much longer, like I was talking to someone the other day who it takes at least 6 months minimum to go through an implementation process, right? For, you know, because there's so many different integrations and things to build up. It's a very complex product. Even though it's a SaaS product, it's very complex. And so in that case, then you may have a professional services team. And in fact, I was talking to someone who's either going to have, is going to try to build out some self-service capabilities and give their customers the option. So you can do it on your own. We'll give you all the things you can learn. You can, you know, it'll prompt you and those sort of things. But for their enterprise customers, there's just really no option to even have that self-service option. And there's some mid-market and smaller companies who want that hand-holding process anyway. And so in that case, they can pay for a professional services agreement, right? And so in that case, then you're building out a professional services team and there are fees associated with it. right? There are even some teams that have differentiation between the sort of named CSM and pooled CSMs. And if you have a named CSM, then they'll charge for that, right? So that can happen. Usually that's in a more mature company and a more complex product where you're doing that. And you can look at that based upon how much time it's taking that you're spending with the customer, and making certain that if there's a lack of buy-in at all, if they're paying for it, they're much more likely to want to partner with you because they have skin in the game. They're paying, like it's money. It means something. They lose something if they don't. So that's another thing to think about in terms of the types of specialization that you might want to do. So all of these things are questions that you would ask as you're taking a look at your own program and what might apply to your program.
And I think
Right?
one point that this brings
Yeah.
up for me as well is like, what is the most important thing for your CSMs to be doing? So again, I think someone made a call of like, in some companies, you do need a more technical CSM. And in that case, maybe you don't need a technical specialist. But for example, like if, customer engagement and like understanding of the industry is like the number one thing you hire for CSMs, but not like those people don't normally have some of that same technical acumen. That's where I do think it's like that specialization is even more important, where it's like, we're not hiring CSMs for this type of background because actually like their main mission is somewhere else, where it's then, we can layer in. So I think also defining like what is a great CSM and what skills do they have, but also what skills don't they have, where this specialization may come in and be really important.
Yep. And then the last thing that we haven't mentioned, because we've mentioned pretty much everything else here, is just the metrics. And the metrics pretty much follow any of the metrics that you're looking at anyway, right? Depending upon where you are in the life cycle, in your maturity, what metrics you're looking at that are going to help you define if you need them, and also measure the effectiveness, right? And again, that comes to the questions that you're asking. So what is the time to value? Be sure to identify that value actually is customer value. Like when you say, the age old, thing is, people will say time to value is, oh, they get to log in. It's like, well, does the customer really think of logging in as why they purchased the product? Because if they didn't define it that way, then that would not be time to first value, right? So look, be sure that you're coming up with those types of questions, those types of metrics that really are valuable to the customer, that then can help you identify also. The other thing you can look at is just your own money and time. Where's the customer getting stuck, and where are you getting stuck, that can help you identify places where you might specialize. All right, we have a LinkedIn example, but what were you going to say, Ezra?
I was going to say also, like, I do think also like defining that need internally as well, of like, why do we need specialist teams, and like, what is the outcome we're looking for? I think, that's something we're facing at the moment, is like, I don't want to say like, how do we justify our existence, but it's like, how do we show the results that having specialists has for the business? And like, why don't we just ask CSMs to do everything? And why is it valuable to have these additional teams that are specializing? So I think that's another one. I think, we talked about a little bit as well, of like why you're specializing, but also making sure the business understands that. But yes, let me talk a little about the LinkedIn example. So for LinkedIn, I would say we've been on about a 5 or 6 year journey of specialization. We started similar to what we were talking about with the onboarding. So our implementation consultants is where we started our specialization journey, realizing we were selling some of the biggest deals. We had started this new program that were kind of all-in deals, and we needed project managers to be able to come in and help those folks really get started in a meaningful way. So that's where this implementation pillar came in. We've since added into our specialist pillars. My team was the second one, which was in our consulting pillar. And these are the product and technical specialists that we mentioned, where for my team, again, we're product specialists on a specific platform. We also do have the technical specialists within our pillar who do the integrations across a number of our products, that they're able to speak that technical language, go deep. And that came in about a year later when those teams started to be built. And again, those are either, again, those folks with a technical mindset, or more of a consulting or CSM type mindset, which is more around enablement, but product specific. We've since expanded beyond that into thinking about, okay, how can we support some of these more technical pre-sales asks? So for some of these products that we know are going to be more technical, how do we get ahead of some of these questions that we're asking? And our solution engineering group was born, where it was really thinking about, okay, how can we get in early in the life cycle to ensure that when folks have signed, they're already set up for success, know what they're going to need to do, and then we can move that over to the consulting groups. And then finally, the one we've created most recently is around scaled advisory. So I've heard it called Tech Touch. There's a number of different things, different ways I've seen this mentioned, but really thinking about how do we help with this long tail of customers. That are some of our smallest ones, but again, there's a huge volume of them. So how do we include digital, but how do we also create that personal touch with what we've done is like a pooled group of CSMs, where they are more reactive, but at a higher volume. And so that's the journey we've been on, is from, as we're saying, like, where do you start, is like that life cycle one. It was like, hey, we're having a big problem with implementations. We built on that. We're having some more intense and technical products that we're launching. Let's get some teams to work with that. We realized if we could get in early in the life cycle, that we can mitigate some of those issues up front. So we created solutions engineers, and now getting to this point where we want to make sure we're having an impact with a long tail of customers, which is where scaled advisory comes into play.
Awesome. And there's some resources here that, and I just put it over there, the slides and resources link, as well as the questions for the breakout groups. And so basically we thought we would send you out to the breakout sessions for 20 minutes and discuss what experience have you had when teams specialized or didn't specialize, from your sense of that experience, or in your current or previous organization, what is the first team you would specialize based on the biggest challenge you're facing? So those are the questions which you'll get over also in the breakout notes. And I want to be sure that you have those there. Any thoughts or questions before we head out to the breakout? All right. So any aha moments or insights that we should share with the rest of the group? I'd love to just hear if there were some things that we dug into out in the breakout groups. I can just start with group one if there isn't anybody who's burning to say something, but anything they're like, you know what, Jan, you didn't mention blah, blah, blah. Oh, good, Pam.
Now, what do you think it's going to be?
About customer education and training, perhaps?
Hello? Well, that wasn't in the first group.
Oh, and we didn't specifically talk about like customer marketing and CS ops and all of that sort of thing, right?
But in the first group, we were just saying in our group, in the first group, people need to have an organized way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just customers.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, you're going to need education. Even Nick Meta says so. So I'm obviously right.
Yes. No, but you're right with that. We missed that point entirely. And of course, I strongly believe that. And I talk about that a lot. So that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
We talked a little bit about that too, that we need to focus on the kind of the one-to-many aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're classifying your content, on the issues that you have, when you start specializing, that education will probably be one of the easiest to implement and the easiest to take off of a CSM's shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
because it may already be a CSM that turns into education in many organizations.
I've also found that customer education often springs out of support efforts too.
Yeah.
Right. Because they are, essentially sort of training on the fly quite a bit because people are like stuck. Right. And that's why they're reaching out to support. So it can spring from either of those places, whether it's an adoption motion or a support motion.
But it does bring that consistency level in, and allows you to spend more time on things like, and we said onboarding really should go to education too. Because that is relatively standardized, and
it depends if it's
right.
if it's a
It's
very
product-based.
technical, if it's a very technical onboarding, or implementation process, that doesn't always lend itself to, I mean, there's education that's part of it, but it's not necessarily education led. But if it's really just about how to onboard people into your product, then that tends to be more education focused. Yeah.
But I think that
Great
becomes part of
points.
implementation. And there's
Mhm.
when you start specializing, you can build a team, right? You build a team that when someone comes on, this is the way things will go, and you're going to touch all of these different teams.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, or a different topic? If there's a different, Annika, did you want to share something before you jump off? Sorry.
That's okay. No worries. I think we were talking a lot around specialization depending on the skills within your team and how you start to specialize based on how and who can actually step into certain specialized roles. I think Emma mentioned that she was always going to be in for support first for special, because being in startups, everyone's very reactive as well. And the one thing I just said was I feel like we've gone forward and backward with specialization. I think we were doing a lot of it in 2019 before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and because of furloughs, we were shrinking teams, and suddenly we were back to being CSMs does it all. And then in 21 and 22, the injection of cash in the VC world resulted in everyone hiring again and specialization happening again. And then now we're back to the 2023 theme of do more with less, meaning everyone's back to doing a little bit of everything as a CSM. So that was just my take on it. So, but happy Halloween, everyone. I do have to run, but
okay.
Thank you, Shan. Amir friendly.
Annika, you got lots of notes there before you leave.
Yeah. And that's a good point though, that Annika raises, right? Is that, if you have, a small team and they're kind of doing it all, I think it's still very important to clarify what you're doing and when, right? Because there may be a time when you say, okay, we're just going to have one person focus on support. And if they're going to do that, it's easier to transition people over to that if you specify. Great, Cynthia, did you want to say anything before you head out? No, you got to go. Okay. And we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything else that we should, that we missed in the earlier part on that we should be sure to cover?
Kimberly has her hand up.
Kimberly, thank you.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I just had a reflection. I mean, because I feel like we've done a lot lately in CS Office. I was talking about burnout, right? And talking about kind of more of the psychological aspects. And so as we were talking in my group, and I was mentioning that I think we need to have, CS Ops, that would be the first one I would bring. But I was thinking about it, I'm naturally a well-rounded, wear lots of hats person. There's so many things that I can do and that I like to have my hands in. But I think the reality is, I was pointing out that one of the reasons I think CS Ops was so good for my team was, as much as all of us had little committees and we could be part of different efforts on the side, the reality is until you actually have one person that their job is to have their razor focus on do we have clean data, what's happening with the data, do we have the right tools, all that.
So that
the
you
reality
can really
is
prioritize.
Yeah, you have to that's where I think it comes in, when it just becomes, where I could do all those activities, but will I when I have these other things on my plate? So I think it's almost an aspect of that time management, boundary setting,
great point.
So yeah, I was thinking about it just from that
we
angle.
are right at the hour. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Kimberly. Thank you everyone for coming today. Sorry to have to be so short, specific on the time, but everybody's jumping off to meetings. Ezra, thank you so much for joining, and really appreciated what you brought to co-leading the session today.
Thanks for having me. Great to meet everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.